Jude Law, welcome to Bullseye. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, I really enjoy the movie, and I'm really glad to watch this kind of movie. The main kind of movie that I want to watch, other than a super, super funny comedy, is basically like a 1970s people running around and shooting each other movie that's also like
with a message.
That's also like a pretty like a real movie, not just Death Wish necessarily.
Sure.
All the best to Death Wish, but the French Connection, you know what I mean?
Well, that's what presented itself to us in this script, or at least the potential for that. And they don't come along very often, and then they don't seem to be made all that often anymore. But they were the real tentpole kind of crowd drawers of cinema when I grew up, and they were films that I aspired to be in, and I know that was certainly what Justin Cazale, our director, was trying to emulate. And it was interesting that, here's a piece set in the 80s. It lent itself to that style of filmmaking, and it also emulated films of that style,
You play a pretty broken human being in the film. You were a producer on the film. Was there a discussion about what would be broken about you?
Absolutely. That was the beginning of the discussion, really. The piece, the true crime element, the historical element, the genre was all there in the first cold read. What wasn't as clear was the character of Husk. Zach Balin, our writer, had made a smart choice to amalgamate certain attributes of various special agents who had been on the case, but we didn't want to actually just base him on any one of them. So we were offered the opportunity to really embellish, detail this character in a way that best suited the story. And I was always taken with this idea that this guy was a kind of broken soldier, that he had had this extraordinary career. The career had come at a cost. This devotion and obsession with his tasks had crushed him kind of physically and spiritually, and he was hoping to have a sort of early retirement, go fishing, hopefully patch his life back together, get his family back under his wings. And of course, what you see is that the biggest case of his life is in front of him. And to me, it was important to take your words, so absolutely to break him, but in a way that felt plausible and realistic, and we lent a lot on some of the histories of the agents I just mentioned, the real agents, going undercover to crack KKK gangs and Cosa Nostra. But a lot of the other stuff we built in ourselves.
I mean, he gets nosebleeds, and a nosebleed is such a vivid sense memory. And it's like, so, because it's so, on the one hand, it's almost meaningless it's not like having a one leg shorter than the other and you limp and you have to limp.
It's not as bad. Yeah, if you bled from the eyes, you'd be really worried.
Yes, this is true. But
there's also something vulnerable about
right,
a nosebleed.
It's the
it's
powerlessness.
Put your head back. Even the biggest tough guy with a nosebleed, suddenly, it's a bit sniffy and a little bit frail. But that was the idea. So I can't remember what came first. It was such a wonderfully collaborative process with Zach, our writer, Justin, the director, and me, and we really all sort of piled in or peeled away these poor guys until he was a husk. Basically, we took from the name. The idea that he had had a stent put in. There's a shot where you see a scar on his chest, and then I think it was Justin who said that his uncle had taken blood thinners because he had had a stent in the same period, and that this drug had caused nosebleeds if he got emotional. And we just thought that what a wonderful, as you said, kind of colourful, physical trait to put in there.
Did you have to decide what about this character is an awful physical disaster, which he is, right? Like he's been to heck and back. He's lost his family. He's constantly smoking and bleeding from the nose. He's really destroyed. But, I read something where the director just passingly mentioned, we did want him to wear pants where he could be proud of his butt.
I know. Yeah, Justin did say that because it's been repeated to me a few times. To be more specific, the physicality of Husk came about mostly from the work of layering in a past and really trying to embody all that we've discussed. The cost of physical and spiritual cost of that kind of work and devotion to law enforcement, but also spending your time with bad people, you know, trying to catch toxicity and understand it. And what does that do to you? You know, how do you shed that? He's not doing an awful lot of meditation and yoga, this guy. He's soaking all that badness up, and it's like it's kind of killing him. But to go back to the physicality, it was literally the effects of the boots and the pants and a belt with a gun. I mean, it's funny how that has an effect on you. You wear them day in, day out, how you carry yourself in a certain way.
Yeah, those are big things. Like the heels on a pair of Western boots and the weight of a big, heavy belt are really big physical elements to carry around. Like I've put on cowboy boots before and been like, whoa, this is really different.
It has an effect on your gait. And the belt does too. It took me by surprise, actually, the effect of a belt with a weapon on it, and being used to wearing one, and comfortable. And if you wear one for any long period of time, you know how you sit and being aware of where it is and what it does to the way you sit and therefore the way you get up is very interesting.
You worked on stage before you worked on screen extensively, and working on stage is not about your face. Like certainly your face is very important. But you know, you're working on conveying a lot of things to people who are sitting 350 feet away from you. And so it's a very different thing. Whereas on film, like your face is 85% of what's like, there's so much of film that is on your face. Did you have to like reckon with what your face meant to people, like how people read your face?
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember now the sort of stages. I mean, I remember early on as a stage actor and hoping to be a film actor and loving film and studying great performances by actors I admired and knowing that was the case. But I never went to school for it. And so also learning ultimately on the job when the opportunity arose and learning by mistakes, really building a sense of confidence in when doing very little works a great amount. And funnily enough, it ties back to what we were talking about with this character Husk, that an awful lot of the physicality, awful lot of the work was done in just understanding his past and being able to sit on that in the moment and hopefully conveying it literally through eyes. And I remember people talking to me as a stage actor and talking about, I mean, I'm sure this is a quote by some great thespian, but I can't remember who it was, so I'll just quote it anyway. But it's something about if acting on stage is surgery with a scalpel, then acting on film is surgery with a laser. And it's like really bringing everything right down. But interestingly, it's all about the same. It's all about sourcing the same place, which is truth and being honest. I'm not a massive fan of theatrical performances unless that's the style of the piece. I prefer a sort of honesty on stage, and you can always tell, you know, when someone's, I think, overdoing it.
But I mean, when you're a screen actor, one of the things that you have to deal with is just what people think of you in the very moment that they see you, like before you've even done anything. Like I think a lot about, I probably brought this up on the show before, about stand-up comics, right? Stand-ups have to walk on stage, and the reason it's a cliche, a stand-up would walk on stage and say, I know what you're thinking. It's like so-and-so had a kid with so-and-so or whatever.
Right.
Is because they need to engage immediately with what the audience thinks of them when they see them. Like when you go out to audition for parts as an actor, or you have reactions to work on screen in particular as an actor, like you just have to engage with the way that people react to how you look in a way that if that isn't your job, you do not.
No, you're absolutely right. It's an awareness of that impact. but it's also the opportunity to play with that impact. Like, I've found that recently, since, in the last 5 or so years, turning 50 and knowing that there's a perception of me through my work that goes back 20-something years. And what I like is the opportunity now of knowing that's there and playing against it. So I just played Henry VIII, for example. Now, Henry VIII had a chapter in his life where he was viewed as being this good-looking young guy who was a catch and all of that. And then, of course, crossed the Rubicon and became this sort of monster. So being able to lean on my past when I was being cast as being like the good-looking young guy and take him, therefore, into another area, this persona, was really thrilling, because it felt like, well, okay, the audience will come with me on that, because I know they have that relationship with me already.
Did you, as a 50-year-old, as you became 50, take the opportunity to take any stock?
Sure, it's been going on. 50 is it's a marker, isn't it? And I certainly didn't stop to take stock, but I've been taking stock since I passed that threshold, because I guess it's just a time to do so. And I've been asked to look back a little more than ever before in situations like this, which has forced me to take stock. I guess so, yeah.
What did that mean?
It gave me a clarity of where I've been and where I want to go, to be honest. It was a sense suddenly of confidence, perhaps, in knowing what I know, and also a sense of purpose to continue to achieve stuff and set out goals and aims for what's to come. I sound like I'm being really cagey. I'm not. I'm just trying to be eloquent.
It's okay. I mean, I was just thinking about it like, here you are. I mean, you're turning 50. B, you and your wife have 2 very young children.
Yeah.
And you have children who are
I've
grown
grown-ups
now.
too, yeah.
Yeah. So it is like...
I always love that contradiction, grown-up children.
Yeah.
I would keep saying to them, what do I call you, kids? No, you're my kids, but you're adults.
Right, but you're like...
my adults.
You're in a lot of ways starting your life again, right? There's a starting your life again that just comes with middle age, right? You hit 50, you're like, well, I'm in best case scenario, only get that many more of these.
True. I tell you what I do like. I like what I've realized. I love challenge. I love change. I love, healthily. I don't mean like, right, drop it all and move on. I like the idea of keeping things alive. There was a moment about 10 years ago when my wife and I first met, and I had this lovely home, but it was very clear that a new chapter was starting, and actually moving on from that and starting again, with everyone in tow, but just felt it refreshing, and it scared the life out of me sometimes. I was talking about this with my dad the other day, actually, about how we moved home quite a few times as a family when I was a kid, only because my parents loved an adventure, and they'd say, right, well, we've done this home, let's go find another one, and they'd rebuild it and renovate, and it's a sense of adventure, I think, that keeps you alert, keeps you fresh, and I certainly get stimulated by that. And it's the same with work, in the sense of, what haven't I done? What's a challenge? What's ahead that scares the hell out of me?
So what was an example of that you...
I think both the taking on Henry VIII, taking on Husk, and even stepping into the Star Wars universe, because they were so contrasting and challenging in, can I pull each of those off? They all presented moments where I doubted myself or the process, but I'm proud of all of them. Another
sort of middle-aged marker that you went through as a performer was doing Hamlet, both in the West End and on Broadway. Mm. And you did that at the point where one does Hamlet, which is basically as you pass into middle age.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
30s.
Like it's a play about coming to terms with your adult self.
Yes.
Sort of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, there are references in it to him being this eternal student, and him realizing in many ways you've got to step up now. And of course, there's also the line that he has to cross where he wants to be king, or he wants to claim his throne on behalf of his murdered father, but of course he's still looked at as a boy, and that in itself also folds into the assumed madness, and that if he can't be king, then he'll be the fool. And the fool, you could think of, represents also youth and clumsiness, you know.
I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now, how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips, which I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that will want to set the table on a roar. Not one now to mock your own grinning.
Was that a goal that you had always had, or was that something that you fell into?
A little bit of both. It always made me laugh, the line in that wonderful film Withnail and I, where the Uncle Monty, says to them, "There's a day in every actor's life where they realize they will not play the Dane." And he looks back on it as this, because he's this sort of, old drunk who's actually probably had a very unsuccessful career as an actor. And so that always sort of amused me. But it wasn't like I had some great aim, I must play Hamlet. It was presented to me by a terrific director, and it felt right. And going back to what I said before, it scared the pants off me.
Right.
I'd actually never done a piece of Shakespeare before. So I sort of thought, gosh, well, if I'm going to get in the water, I might as well dive into this one.
I mean, Shakespeare is really difficult to perform on stage, because it's very good. I don't know if you knew that about Shakespeare.
He is pretty good, yeah.
Yeah. But also because, you have an intrinsic and extrinsic goal. You have the goal of portraying this character, but you also, to do it in, the 21st century, you have to, at the very least, trust the director, but to some extent do work yourself to communicate clearly. Yeah. Simply. Just because old-timey words in funny patterns could get in the way. Mm-hmm. Right? And that is a challenge that would be terrifying to me.
You have a lot on your side, though. I was fortunate in that I had a director who didn't overly enforce a concept onto the production. I went on to do Henry V with him too, and he did the same there. He really gets he gets out of the way of the text, and the thing that you really have on your side is this amazing text, which, you're right, is daunting in that if you approach it as oldie worldy and period, but actually is also some of the most beautiful poetic writing and insightful. And if you just study it and trust it, it does a huge amount of the work for you. Both emotionally, it takes you with it, but also, you are able to express the feelings through this incredible song.
Are you scared to get too intellectual about these things? I mean, you played Henry VIII. There's a lot of books about Henry VIII. I know you've read a bunch of them, right? Is there a point where it is no longer helpful to you to intellectualize, and you have to put that aside and engage with whatever it is?
Absolutely. And I'm not one of these actors who has a kind of a process that is sort of the same every time, but there's always a certain amount of work that I think you should do just to know your subject. When I played a pope, I went down a terrible rabbit hole for a period, reading up, thinking I should know everything about the Vatican and the church, and I was reading up on popes, and it just left me cold. I didn't know what to do, and I went to the director saying, I'm lost. I've gotten up to sort of Saint Peter and blah, blah, and he was like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "There's a waste of time. Just play the character. This is a man. Just be the man." And it was kind of a good lesson at that time, not to worry necessarily about all the backstory. But with Henry, there were so many clues there that actually, and once I'd read a couple of the books, I was obsessed with finding out whether there were more facts. And what really intrigued me about it was, in fact, out of like 20 books or so I read, but all these different historians with all their different perspectives, where the facts were very few and all the same. And everything else was their perception of it. And that freed me up, because then I was suddenly thought, well, I can make my own leap here, and I can interpret him in my own way.
In the new Star Wars show that you're in, which is called Skeleton Crew, you're working with a bunch of kids mostly, which is a really, like, the stars of the show are kids.
Yeah.
And that is a really different experience that is, I would imagine, very difficult to intellectualize, because, you know, as intellectually gifted as kids may be, ultimately they are cast as child actors because of, at least in part, qualities that they possess in and of in and of themselves,
and similar to the character. And I know John said that early on, that he had spoken to Richard Donner about it, and Donner had said, you know, you need to find kids who are very close to the characters, or let the character of the child direct the character on the page. I loved the idea. You know, I discovered Star Wars as a kid. So my relationship with it is sort of still as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, or however old I was, probably a bit younger even. You know, that universe to me is seen through those eyes. And so to make the protagonist children, I thought was wonderful. And it was a way into that universe that I made sense to me. I didn't want to necessarily go into it with a sort of worthiness and a too adult an approach. And I was alarmed, actually, at just how seasoned and professional these kids were. They arrived really ready to work and really ready to be challenged, and were very, very accomplished. And then they were also children, so they brought a wonderful sense of goofiness and play, and sticking things on their face when they were off camera, and running around and being very excited, which also was very important. And at that point, I also chose the character had this room to be this kind of grumpy. He didn't really understand children. He's kind of never had a childhood. This fella Jod, and so he's also the kind of big brother who's just like, what are you doing? Why are you crying for mummy? Pull yourself together and fly the spaceship. Shut up. You know, and that dynamic was interesting to me and fun, and meant that. As a little group, we could really play off each other, and they were encouraged to be themselves. They were encouraged to have fun and be kids, but they also were very professional.
Did working with kids make you think of your own acting when you were a child or a teen?
Not really.
Should you have? I mean, your parents were teachers.
Yeah.
But then they ended up having their own theater company, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where that happened in the timeline of your childhood. I know that you were in the National Youth Musical Theater.
I joined a youth theater company when I was about 12, and we were doing sort of workshops and theater, improvised and productions outside of school. And then my mum and dad's theater company.
Improvised?
Yeah, we would do workshops.
Which kind of like story theater improvised? Like making Mike Lee plays? What were
yes, kind of. And you know, working on themes and putting scenes together and improvising them, and then, you know, they would be scripted and written down, and we'd build plays that we'd then take to the Edinburgh Festival, and we went on an international tour once. They were a very talented company, the National Youth Music Theatre, and it was really, looking back, a great kind of, that was my training in many ways, because I was a kid. We were all kids, but they took it very seriously and put a lot of responsibility on us. And my mum and dad, but it was a very, you know, my family were very creative. My mum and dad both loved the theatre, loved film, loved art. My sister's a painter. It was quite a bohemian upbringing.
When was the first time that you played an American?
Good question. I think it might have been on film. I think it was Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil with Clint Eastwood film. I may be wrong, but I think that's when, yeah.
If you had been a guy that went to RADA and did 4 years of dialect training or whatever. I'd say, yeah, well, it's just a technical job. You get your printed out in International Phonetic Alphabet and you just go to town that way. But what did you have to do as a guy who didn't do that?
You ask advice, and I was led very fortuitously straight to the door of Tim Monach. Tim Monach is the godfather of dialect instruction, and he makes it incredibly straightforward and easy. Even though you got to do your homework.
Had you been cast already?
Yeah,
okay.
I'd done a half-hearted sort of Savannah Georgian accent in the audition and got it. And then had to get to work and really make it authentic. And I've worked with Tim pretty much ever since. And if not Tim, then someone he's associated with.
What do you have to do?
You basically are training your muscles in your mouth to work in a different way. So some of it is. It depends on your ear. Like I've got a decent ear so I can hear a mimic, but then you really have to get into the muscular technicality of how a sound is made, and then also little details like how vowels may trip into other vowels, and it's also forcing you to be specific. So for example, with Terry Husk, who we created, it's no good saying, oh, he's from New York or he's an East Coast. You got to know what street he's on. Like, what does his mum sound like? What does his dad sound like? What's he listening? What's he hearing on the radio? And you get into that, and you start really building up a soundscape of what you want this person to sound like.
Because there's a real danger anytime a British person is playing an American that they're just going to be
and vice versa, by the way.
Well, sure, it doesn't come up as much. One time Dick Van Dyke told me that nobody told him he was doing a bad job and he wished they had mentioned it.
Did he really tell you that?
Yeah, he did tell me that. It was really great. Dick Van Dyke's a joy.
Yeah, that's a pitfall. It's there. I mean, look, I'm not commenting much because I think I've had varying successes at pulling it off. Some are easier than others. Some are harder. It's interesting also what directors want. Like sometimes I'm amazed that I kind of go in and go, so let's talk about the accent, and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, he's an American. I'm an Englishman. We got to be specific here. Oh, yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. We'll just do an American accent. Like, no. It's set in Charleston. We got to. So interesting that sometimes they don't even see it or hear it, and or they'll get worried that there's a dialect coach on, and they're not going to tell you how to act, are they? I'm like, no. It's sound. It's just he's just interested in my diphthong. You know what I mean?
What's a phoneme? I think I'm using that word correctly. What's a phoneme you had to work really hard on for this movie?
A phoneme?
A phoneme, isn't that with a
sound?
Yeah.
I don't want to say where Terry's from, because just in case I did get the accent wrong, I'm just happy people go, oh, it sounded really plausible. That I'll take that, and I'm not going to open myself up to, well, you didn't sound like you were from there. But there's a certain R. There's a kind of AR sound, which was really specific and just didn't come naturally. And
but R.
Yeah, it's a kind of dull an A sound. It was really the A sound. It's but an A sound, an A vowel sound on certain words. Yeah,
because there's a sort of flatness to Western speech that's like if you're going to be from Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
You can be forgiven a little bit of foghorn leghorning. Mm-hmm. You can just enjoy a few vowels like Daniel Craig and Knives Out or something. Mm-hmm. But there's a flatness to Western speech that is very subtle. And, there are specifics about it that even I as an American would have trouble parsing.
There's also where it's placed. Because certainly as a young man, and I've noticed this, if you listen to a lot of English people talk up there like that, and they'll talk up out of their nose or out of their forehead. And but if you start doing that in American, you sound very odd. Americans tend, or certainly East Coasters tend to talk much more down there. And so placing your voice naturally down there and still feeling like you've got some kind of range and personality is quite unnatural, but it's a really interesting challenge. And so placing Husk's voice in finding that placement was key.
This gift is called the gift of Costner.
Bless him.
If you're able to bring your voice down there and still be an actor.
Yeah. Just mumble your way through.
Yeah. He's wonderful at it. I have a stupid question to ask you. I'm bald, and you've always had this very handsome hair area in the front of
I know.
your hair.
My peak, my island, my kids call it.
And are you prepared to defend that area as necessary
with my life?
As you,
you mean fake?
You age,
sow some seeds in there.
Technological. There's far more than just surgical interventions these days. How important is defending this front to you?
It's so vital to who I am. However, I've shorn it off several times for certain roles, and I've no issue with a pate. My father is bald, and that's a very good question. I think it's one that I'll have to answer when the day comes.
You're welcome here with us.
Thank you.
We're glad to accept you.
I mean, I was always, one of the things many things I love about Jack Nicholson is obviously his performances, his persona, his energy, but was always the receding hairline.
Yeah.
It to me made him unbelievably attractive and charismatic. So
yeah.
I'm a big fan
I know
of
exactly what you're talking about. I agree with you completely. I think you have that going on.
Thanks.
Like your front hair is really distinctive and a big part of how unspeakably handsome you are.
Thank you so much, and I will defend it to the last.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if it goes,
My
it goes,
island.
And you can come hang out with me.
Okay, thanks, mate.
In the bald part of town. Well, Jude Law, I sure appreciate your time. It was really nice to get to talk to you.
And you, thanks, mate.